So this is already the last public lecture of our fall series on human movement and inequalities. And as I said to Biao Xiang, this is a little bit like fireworks because we will welcome Biao Xiang, professor of social anthropology at the University of Oxford. Biao Xiang has come under the spotlight of academic research during these awkward times because he was one of the first and also one of the most qualified to understand the extreme relevance of migration and mobility studies to shed light on the current crisis, and conversely also on the multiple lessons about migration and mobility that the pandemic can teach. He has created and contributed to the Coronavirus and Mobility Forum on the website of the Center on Migration Policy and Society based at the University of Oxford. And of course, his interest in the pandemic's effect on mobilities has raised our interest in his work, but there are also at least three other reasons why we wanted to invite him here at the NCCR on the Move. Because first, his work fits perfectly in our overarching topic of human movements and inequalities, as his research on the pandemic, but also his previous research provides this social anthropology perspective on uneven treatment of different forms of human movement. Second, also, he has this broad conception of mobility, which is particularly useful for the ongoing reflections on the migration and mobility nexus that we are conducting here at the NCCR on the Move. And his analysis, he includes cross-border, internal migration, daily commutes, mobile work, and instead of taking migration as a distinct phenomenon to be explained, he sees mobility and immobility also as particular means of social change. So this is the second aspect that was really interesting for us. And finally, and also related to the latter point, he helps us also to decenter our look beyond the usual suspects of European and North American countries. His long expertise on various types of migration in China, India, and also Australia will help us to fulfill the need to understand the world of non-Western practices and politics of mobility. And this is precisely what he will be doing tonight, as I understood, as he will explore the relation between mobility, trade, and power in China with the help of the concept of logistification. And to complete our fireworks, we will have also the great pleasure to welcome Ka-Kin Chuk, who will discuss Biao Xiang's presentation. Ka-Kin Chuk is a social and cultural anthropologist whose research revolves around the trans-regional mobilities, transnationalism, and migration governance with focus on China, Hong Kong, South Asia, and also the Netherlands. So Biao Xiang will talk for about 45 minutes, and then Ka-Kin Chuk will discuss his presentation for about 10 minutes. Then we will open the floor to Q&A. I just need to inform everyone here on the WebEx session that I will mute them in case they didn't do it. And I invite now Biao Xiang to talk. Your talk is entitled Logistification from Below, Mobility, Trade and Power in EU, China. And I very much look forward to listening to it. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin. I must say that I'm very honored to be invited to give this talk because I was really impressed by NCCR project. I didn't know much, actually. I learned the most about this project through the website. I must say the website is very well designed and has very interesting and substantive information. And I was indeed thinking of presenting some thought about the coronavirus and the mobility, but then I thought probably you all had had enough with it and get fed up with it by this time. So I also wanted to say something slightly different. But as Robin mentioned, I curated and managed this coronavirus and mobility forum in Oxford, which has about 160 pieces so far. From the end of February, we will launch another virtual information resource site called Inventory on Mobility and Social Economic Changes, based in Max Planck Institute in Germany. And the idea of the inventory is to collect short entries that will document emerging patterns of mobilities. And first of all, it will be, the first batch of writing will be related to COVID, but in the future, it will be opened up. And based on this information, we very much wanted to discern, raise some new conceptual lines of inquiries. One idea behind this inventory is precisely because we have so much information flying around. What we need is something more or less stable anchor that will help us to accumulate this fast-moving information and therefore to translate this data into concepts. But of course, NCCR is doing a brilliant work. Probably you will be surprised to see our website. Now I can't remember. I was so impressed by your website. I was thinking still some ideas, maybe. So don't be surprised if you see look similar. So I very much hope that we can work together on this idea and create a knowledge repository and create an open platform for exploring new lines of inquiries. And today I want to talk something slightly different, which is about actually a case that Kakin knows even better than I do, is about the mobility, trade, and power in a trading town in Southeast China. And there's a key concept I want to propose tonight is a channel. So logistification from below, maybe it is, I feel it probably is too complicated, too convoluted, but anyway, I want to hear from you anyway. So the channel is the idea of channel. So the researcher this paper want to address a very applied or policy relevant question. How can we bring low technology, small size, and labor-intensive producers and trading, especially in the global south, into the world market? We are familiar with two ways how small players can be connected to the global net and global market. One way is what we can call chains. The other way is what we can call networks. Chains, supply chain capitalism. Small players can join the global market by becoming the low end of suppliers in this global value chain or global production chain. And Anna Singh wrote about that already. There are many ethnographies about that. And we know that if you are part of the low end of the chain, basically you are dictated by the commander, on the top, who have the brand, who doesn't produce anything, normally in the global north, of course. And then the working condition is normally very harsh for the workers, and very little autonomy, and very precarious, because they can stop their contract anytime. The second way for small players to join global market is networks. Primarily, migrant entrepreneurs networks. So tomorrow we will discuss a very interesting paper written by postdocs at this center, which is precisely about that, migrant networks. And some of our colleagues have conceptualized this as the alternative globalization or globalization from below or low-end globalization. Meaning that small players develop their own networks and often engage in an informal and sometimes illegal way of trading as a way to break into the global market. But that we know that the condition again is very precarious. And even though we scholars can celebrate, when we write articles, we can celebrate the agency, the creativity of the migrants, but actually it's no fun to carry out the trade bordering on the law, on the always the semi-illegal, semi-legal, and semi-informal, semi-formal. I mean, it probably is ethnographically interesting to read, but I mean, I don't want to do something like that myself. So, and so that two narratives, the two imaginary, chain and the networks, really represent a rather segmented understanding of globalization. Then you have the chain narrative, the supply chain narrative, emphasizes somehow extremely powerful and very damaging mode of globalization, neoliberal globalization, under which people have very little power, and the global south is basically being exploited. And then, in contrast, the negative narrative celebrate agencies in the global south, but does not really point out how these agencies, individual agencies, can lead to something bigger, can lead to systemic changes, right? And ordinary people don't want just to celebrate their own creativities. I mean, they want to have a better life. They want to improve their life. And of course, the illegal migrants are always very creative because otherwise they can't survive. They don't have other resources. What can they do? So this paper wanted to propose a third imaginary, which I call the channels. And the word channel is not my creation, my invention. Actually, is a word that I learned from the local officials in Yiwu, a trading town in southeast China. And this town, now I have to look at the figures. It's the world's largest supply center, which is basically one marketplace, supply center for low-end light commodity. I think in 2018, the trade was nearly 40 billion US dollars a year. So that is a small town. I think the population is definitely less than 1 million. Now I can't remember. And it's very, very global, very global. And so when I ask them, why do you think EU is doing so well in terms of this trade? They said, oh, we have the channel advantage. What does it mean by channel advantage? Basically, they mean that any traders come here will be able to find a channel through which they will find a very specific product that they want in terms of design, in terms of niche, in terms of quality, in terms of price. And conversely, small producers in that area can always find the channels through the market, through which channel, and they can match traders who will like their products. So therefore, so the channel basically means the connections between suppliers and the buyers, but which is not stable. It keep changing. So therefore, channel is very different from chain in the sense that it's not a hierarchical, and the channel is also very different from networks because the network is based on long-term interpersonal trust. And the durability is an important feature of networks. But the channel is not. Channel is that you come to this marketplace and then you look for each other. Of course, there was a relation, the collaboration will last until the deal is done. But otherwise, it will be, next time you look for someone else. And both parties are constantly looking for someone new. So I want to develop this idea channel, and then the way I want to do it is to just go through why these small traders can do that, and then how they do that, and then I look at the condition under which you can create this, small traders can create a channel. So therefore, the small scale producers and the traders can be connected to the global market. Just very quickly, my main subject are Muslim migrants, internal from northwest China to this town in southeast China. And they work as Arabic Chinese translators because they learned Arabic through their Islamic studies at home. But at the same time, they become buying agents. So for their clients in the Middle East, because the clients probably when they come every time, when they come to China, every time they need something, so they will delegate the agents to the translators to buy things for them. So therefore, they become buying agents. And what I found quite interesting is number one, very different from what I expected, as they don't have very strong networks. So they said, okay, the most important thing is you go to the market and you always look for what the clients need. So they're constantly changing the relation with suppliers. At the same time, their relation with the clients are more, they try to keep it stable, but it's never really developed what we would think like networks. For example, there's extremely rarely they will have credit relations. For example, the buying agents will never make in advance payment on behalf of the buyer and vice versa. So they said, okay, we just do it the business in a very, a clean manner. They said a very clean manner. So there's no these financial obligations towards each other. And also I was surprised, if we have time, we can talk more. Actually, in terms of religion, I thought that they come together due to their common faith, that they play a role, but actually they said that they also avoid talking about religion too much with their clients. And actually they develop rather different understanding about Islam. These Chinese Muslims who work as translators actually develop quite a distinct identity about themselves, religious identity for themselves as compared to their Middle Eastern traders. So I thought, that's quite, so what they want to emphasize is that we are professional. We are professional. We just look for the products that will meet the client's need. So we don't develop these two personal relations. And then we look at the buyer's side. Of course, networks do play important role. Otherwise, especially the networks in their home countries, as well as networks in other neighboring Middle Eastern countries, because they often will, as a kind of a wholesaler, right? They were as distributors. They were hand out the goods to other small retailers. So there is a network there, and the networks are, some of them actually do meet our expectation about diaspora traders networks, and it's a generational. it's generationally long, and it's also family business, etc. But many are not. Many, especially from Africa, from Latin America, and from Russia, they are just first generation traders. They're first comers to China, and many of them are students. Actually, they know nothing about China. And EU became so big precisely because they attract many new traders from the global south. These people have no networks with the Chinese traders. So it's a question: how do they do business without these networks? And also, I think it's kind of footnote, but important for the typical diaspora traders. They have networks, but then we have to ask the question: okay, these networks, of course, are everywhere, are ubiquitous, right? Diaspora trader networks. But question is, why EU? Why EU develop itself into a global hub for small-scale traders and producers to enter the global market, but not why somewhere else? So what I need to explain is not the existence of networks per se, but what I need to explain is that how and why these existing networks are attracted to EU. And in this process, these networks acquire new capacity. So, and then when you look at that, how the EU create new capacities for the existing networks, actually, this is we have to go beyond the network logic in order to understand the power of the market there in EU. And the key, as I see it, is a channel. I mean, this is probably related to our discussion about the mobilities. I mean, I'm personally always think that mobility itself is very little can be said. I mean, sorry, mobility itself is does not have analytical power in it. So the question is always, what kind of capacity do mobility create for the actors, and how mobility are organized, right? And what effect of this organizational pattern create? Once mobility is linked to this institution, the mobility will mean one thing, but it's linked to another way of patterning or relation, the mobility will mean something completely different. I mean, this probably is the one kind of approach I wanted to get. The network and mobility must be articulated with certain institutional setup in order to understand the effects. Channel. So how do they do? I mean, one key reason that these small traders can come and find the channels is that there's a huge marketplace, and the marketplace. I mean, of course, everyone is very impressed by how big it is, but they have quite a unique regulation. It's called a marketplace procurement model, which is unique in China. What does this mean? Put it very simply, it basically means inside of the market, international trade will be treated the same as internal trade. Because by normal regulation, if you want to engage in international trade, you must have a special license, you must have a foreign currency account, you have to go through all this regulation, and also there is a tax rebation policies. So you have to collect all these invoices to prove, how much the cost has you have taken care of in the whole process of producing a particular product, right? And then you sell, and then after settle the bill, you have to send the government all these documents. They say, okay, in this market, we forget about all that. You come to this market, okay, you do international trade, but you just do as if it's your daily shopping. You see, you like the thing that you buy, you pay cash, and then, of course, I mean, if it's a small amount, you can take the goods straight away. But if it's a large amount, 2 months later, 3 months later, and then they have a large number of shipping agents, cargo agents can help you to the shipping. So according to the local officials, the idea is to, by doing so, let the peasants meaning suppliers, producers. The Chinese peasants who know nothing about the world can sell goods to the world. And let the foreign traders who know nothing about the China can buy things from China. Right? Because you just look at the things and you use a calculator and show the price and the bargain. Of course, they hire translators, etc. I mean, it's quite resourceful, actually. Many people buy many things. And also the share size matters. Share size, and it's very, very well organized. I mean, probably we don't have time to go to details. I just report one peculiar scene for you. But if you go to the market, you will find probably half a floor of, it's a huge market, half a floor, they will have like 20 shops were selling almost identical goods. Almost identical goods. Then you think, oh my God, it's not uncommonsensical, because normally shops want to avoid other shops who are selling similar goods next to it, right? But this is a market regulation by the government. All the similar goods must come to the same corner. And in the beginning, traders didn't like it. Chinese traders didn't like it, but later they found it's very good. Why? Because by grouping together, for example, pens, so probably they will have 30 shops selling pens, all kind of pens together. Then the traders, the foreign traders, can come to this corner and they have almost endless choices they can look at, and they can compare the price. And so everything is very transparent for the foreigner, and then they can make a quick decision. And also, so that is, I mean, I mentioned this because it's very different from the classical bazaar economy as Clifford Geertz described, how the information, you got the information and you wanted to partially review some part, but not the other part, etc. But in EU market, in this part, it does look very professional. Basically, everything is transparent, but of course, you need to bargain about delivery time, and if you order more, whether or not price can go further down, and etc. But otherwise, it is transparent, and there's a huge diversity. Also, was an attraction for small-scale traders from the global south. There is a phenomenon I also observed in EU, is that probably I can call the third world consumerism, because people say, oh, we are from Africa, and it's low-end products. But African consumers do not want to buy the same clothes as their sisters or neighbors. They want to buy a unique piece. So therefore, every time you come to China to buy clothes, children's clothes or women's clothes, you cannot buy the same one too many. You buy 5 of this design, another 5, another design. So probably you buy 100 pieces, but of 20 types. And then if you go to big companies, no one will talk to you about that. I mean, the total amount is not big, but yet many have so many types, right? And also many traders, they run like grocery shops. They will buy women's clothes, children's clothes, stationery, cooking ware, everything come together. No other place can satisfy that kind of demand. There are all kind of quite a peculiar arrangement about what regard count as wholesale. If you put many things together from a few shops, they also there's a few shop owners agree. Okay, we regard you that is a wholesale. I give you special discount, etc. And then this leads to another kind of arguably unique, and actually it's irregular practice from EU. It's called a mixed container, because according to the international as well as the national regulation about transshipment, basically one container can only have one type of items, and you have to declare so to the customs office. But no traders can just buy one container full of clothes. So inside one container they have hundreds of things. But then the local government say, okay, let it go. This is called the mixed container method of shipment, etc. So all this they create this arrangement. So you create a kind of this channel between buyers and the wholesalers and the suppliers. The suppliers is just nearby to the marketplace, and ship agents. to create this eco system. So that the marketplace itself is not a physical place. So it itself is a particular type of institution that allow for this kind of channel making activities. And why they can, the government can develop such a market, and why individual traders can quickly search channels without much knowledge, without much capital, and without much trust about each other. And that's related to how the market is regulated. Actually, the market is regulated quite meticulously. And I was told, I didn't meet the person, the cadre, the official who has been in charge of this market for about a decade or two, actually was a veteran, a retired soldier. He was using military method to regulate the market. So it's very, very clearly is a grade type of measurement. The whole market is divided to many grades. Every grade, they have a head who is in charge of the social order. So it's not a simple just spontaneous commercial transaction. And the one important factor that explains why this market works well. Actually, I talked to the traders. What do you think? Why the EU market does well? And very interestingly, many traders, Chinese traders, actually are migrants because the EU itself is a small town. So these migrants from other part of China, they are very experienced and seasoned entrepreneurs. They said a very important reason is because the entire market is state-owned. So all this shop space is owned by the state, by the government. So all the shop owners, basically who are the wholesale suppliers, have to rent the space directly from the government. And you are not allowed to sublet. If you are found out you are sublet, immediately you will be disqualified and will be delicensed. And this is very different from many other similar markets in other parts of China and globally as well. Because in many other markets, they privatized the ownership of the shopping space. And then people started speculating because market space, the shop space actually became quite a valuable asset. People, once you become owner, you don't want to run the shop anymore. You want to sell it, or you want to rent, sublet it to someone else. And they say, okay, once that happens, if you are not 100% dedicated to your business, the marketplace will just become a real estate speculation site, and the business goes down. So I thought that is quite interesting. So actually this state ownership, public ownership, according to the traders themselves, actually was an important reason why this market did well. And of course, there's a very meticulous system to maintain order and to settle disputes, etc. So I probably don't have time to talk about this logistification from below. So basically, briefly, logistification from below means the government is able to create such an ecosystem is to a great extent because the Chinese government invested hugely in logistical development. Logistics is not only about infrastructure, but also including, this warehouse, the distribution center, and of course, let alone telecommunication system and etc. And why logistification from below? Because the logistical development, logistification basically means a trend in which the circulation of goods become more important than the production of goods in terms of how the profit can be made and etc. Logistification itself globally is very much driven by large companies, by large corporations. I mean, particularly since the 1960s, it was directly driven, I mean, not driven, sorry, directly driven by big capital, and it was capitalizing on military know-how. Container itself has direct root in the Second World War. And Walmart, the earliest managers in the company of Walmart, they were soldiers. There are some are generals from Pentagon. Right? So that is because the logistics itself is a military technique. So that explains how the supply chain capitalism start flourishing since the 1970s. I mean, the economic side was, of course, because of oil crisis in the 1970s. So there is a declining of profit rate. Then the big companies think, okay, we must find a new way to reap profit. So they see, okay, the production has exhausted its capacity potentials in terms of the profit making. So let's look at distribution and circulation. So in China is when we look at how infrastructure and the logistics have been developed since actually 2003 was the first time when the term logistics was recognized as a proper economic sector in the official documents, 2003. And now, of course, China is the world's largest logistic business market in terms of market capitalization. So from below, it is it's driven by a government, but by both central and local government. From below, it is it has a. I'm surprised myself the tendency of penetrating to the low level, to the remote places and the low level. Of course, this has something to do with the political system being authoritarian. As they have a huge interest in monitoring, controlling society, that is all related. But nevertheless, they create such infrastructure, create such a condition that the small players can have the physical and the technological possibility to connect themselves with each other, and therefore they can enter the global market. So that is another condition that they can create such a market a place for channeling. And then the final point I wanted to raise is the concept of logistical power. So what we see now is this kind of the channeling instead of supply chain or instead of network create among my subject group, create a special lifestyle. Because the channeling on one hand is very labor intensive, but it also gives them a lot of freedom. So different from being a part of supply chain, and so then they develop a quite a distinct religious identity, which made the government, local government, very nervous. And then I witnessed one quite a significant conflict or clash between these Muslim traders, mainly the Chinese translator and the buying agents on one hand, and the local government on the other hand, regarding the name of a local mosque. And some foreign traders also participated in that contestations. We don't have time to go to details, but it suffices to say that the government was very swift and very decisive in cracking that down. I was surprised because the issue was very sensitive. And the reason I was thinking and also interviewed was because the traders are so much dependent on this marketplace for their business activities. So once if the local government is, they said, oh, the local government invite you for tea, have a chat, then immediately you feel tremendous pressure. So this is why I call it this channeling is very enabling economically enabling for the small traders, because now you can enter the global market quite efficiently, but not empowering. Certainly politically not empowering. But of course, as I said, this is it's a contestation, because this channeling does create a certain space for them to develop their own social networks. I mean, among my subject groups, actually, has a very strong religious dimension. The social group have this kind of civil society, incipient form of civil society. But precisely because the entire trading system was so efficiently managed, facilitated, and conditioned by the local government, so actually that the self-organization was severely and effectively discouraged. So they are enabled, but they are disempowered in a way. So then the future is something really needed to observe, and of course, I mean, the few questions must be answered in the future research. Number one is the production side. I didn't talk about the production, but if you really want to dialogue with the global value chain or supply chain, you have to look at how these producers, small producers, hire labor and etc. Number two is, of course, the local government's rationality and the method of regulating channel. The logistical power. Yeah? So now, I mean, I mentioned the case of contestation is for the purpose of illustrate the point that now the local government acquire a new type of power, which I call logistical power. Logistical power is a type of power that you get in the process of facilitating other people's mobility and connection. It is very close to infrastructural power, as Michael Mann has developed, but a little more. Michael Mann is, I mean, the infrastructural power is basically, I deduct your income tax before you even receive your salary. I build all the roads and the hospitals, right? So therefore, the state power can penetrate to the civil society. But logistical power goes beyond that. Is not only penetrating into the society, but basically it follow your movement, and also they facilitate your movement to start with, right? They are really enable you, but at the same time, they monitor you very closely. I mean, I was thinking what language I should come with to really capture the logistical power. Because Michael Mann has this nice line, right? He said the Michael Mann distinguish despotic power and infrastructure power. Despotic power is a power over or above society, and the infrastructure power is a power through society. So the logistical power is even more than through, is that following you, is on you. it's attached to you. And another point is that logistical power actually, in a way, is more closely related to the despotic power than infrastructure power does. There I have material to say that why the government can manage the market so efficiently. There's lots of reasons, because they have very strict, effective control about the customs, about the daily policing. So that is, they don't use it, but these are all, is a weapon on the backstage. So with this, I mean, despotic probably is not accurate word, but this legal sovereign power, the power that we normally associate with the state, that have hard power, political power, was a very important condition for effective implementation of logistical power. So logistical power on one hand looks very nimble, very enabling, but yet it is very deep. So I mean, I think maybe especially for mobility scholars, I don't know whether it makes sense. Probably it's completely nonsense. But for mobility scholars, it's probably worth thinking. How the how local officials, policymakers imagine this logistical power. Because on one hand, actually, local government sometimes they treat the whole marketplace as if it is a black box. What do I mean by that? Because they basically say once you enter the marketplace, you do international trade as if it's internal domestic trade. You do whatever you want, just the cash and the goods, direct transactions. No need a document, no need a paperwork. So as if they completely black off the internal transactions, which is true. But the government certainly has not lost the control at all, because now through all this big data and the social media tracing technology, they can follow each individual as a person. They can have eye on each individual. So therefore, they're not really regulating your precise transaction. The transaction is completely free. But once you step on certain red line as an individual, immediately the alarm will go off. So that kind of new. So therefore, it's related to the new understanding of what is economy. Of course, what is privacy, what is subject, etc. Probably it will touch on all this set of issues in the process of mobility and the regulation. Yeah. So I will stop here, and I'm sure King will have very important comments to make.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you to Robin, Gianni, and Adina for inviting me to discuss this very fascinating paper. And of course, thank you to Biao for giving us such an important paper. And I think Biao's papers has made a very original contributions to tell us why and how Yiwu is globally so significant when we are trying to understand what's going on in today's globalizations. And I'm sure that many of you have already read or come across with quite a lot of emerging scholarly work on trade, business, and development in Yiwu or in other parts of Southeast China, quite close to Yiwu. And especially, for example, Professor Magnus Marstons, who is based at Sussex, has a large team who trace diasporic connections between Yiwu and different markets in Southeast Asia, in Eastern Europe, Middle East, Afghanistan, South Asia, so on and so forth. So you can see there has been more and more scholarly work coming up in the studies of Yiwu. But Biao has made a very original contribution, because when you look into the current literature, we always lack the language to explain and to analyze why Yiwu has been developed so fast into a world commodity market. Of course, I mean, those study has a very strong empirical focus within their own project agenda, such as to trace the diasporic connections, to trace the historical development of the market, so on and so forth. While at the same time, we don't have a strong theoretical and conceptual language for us who may not be specialists in the studies of traders, diaspora, and mobility, but while at the same time should also understand why it will become so important in the studies of today's global economy, trade connections, and how Yiwu has been connected to the world in different respects. So I think Biao's paper has been very important in this regard. And as such, I think it may be quite productive to engage with Biao's paper in this lecture in three ways. First, the historical juncture, that's what I call historical juncture. Second, inequality. And third, the unstoppable machine of global capitalism. So I will start with historical juncture. I think it is quite obvious to us that it is not necessary at the very beginning of the time that the Yiwu local government has a strong idea how the government should develop the local marketplace, how the government should develop the logistic network that will facilitate more mobility, more trade activities in the area of Yiwu. But while at the same time, when you look into the historical development of the Yiwu wholesale market, or other similar markets, such as Ketao, my field site in Zhejiang province, which also have a very similar kinds of economic development. These small counties, small cities in Southeast China, they were quite early to have a strong sense that it was very important to have a strong logistic network that will help the rapid development of the marketplace with a strong with a strong basis on the local trading activities. And I think it reminds me of Biao's earlier work on Zhejiang village in Beijing and its wider migrant entrepreneurial network, which is, as some of you may have read Biao's earlier book, Transcending Boundaries. It was mostly about trans-regional network constructed by migrants and how it facilitates a strong business niche among these migrants in a very specific locality in Beijing. So it is quite obviously a grassroots dynamism from below. It is mostly about how migrants have constructed a closely linked network that would be useful for the migrant to create a vibrant economy without relying on a particular place, politics, and economic development. But this kind of development is I think it was always in the time in the late 80s and the early 1990s, in which the local state or the central state have played relatively less influential role to develop such in a logistic or trans-regional trading network. While at the same time in the 2000s or since the early 2010s, you obviously have seen a stronger interventions from the local and the central state to make sure that they have a say on how the local infrastructural development, how the local logistic network should be developed. And this historical juncture between the earlier logistic network that were mostly constructed by migrants and the later development of a stronger, more nationwide logistic network that were mostly in niche development agenda is still not quite clear. So I guess maybe we can explore more about how this historical juncture happened at a particular point in which when and how the state had discovered such importance of logistic power from below in the local context. So I think that's the first point about what I call historical juncture. And the second point is inequality, or more specifically, what I would call the everyday possibility of inequality. I think this has at the core of this this concept inequality is a question. The question is, to what extent we can categorize small traders as one group? Because when you look into the phenomena of logistifications from below, it has bring quite, as Biao has argued, it has brought a lot of logistic power to the local government and to the local Yiwu society at large. But such distributions of power, as I would see, is always quite uneven among different stakeholders, among different players in both state and non-state space. And I think it's quite unusual for, I think actually it's quite usual for someone in the market who get more powers than the other. And for some government department to get more power than the other government departments within the local government office. And here, I think I would like to offer my very own ethnographic observations based on my long-term ethnographic studies on Kertao, which is not very far from Yiwu. And as I mentioned, it has a very similar economic development because Kertao also has a gigantic marketplace. It's also very vibrant in terms of domestic and international trade. And it also has a sizable foreign trading populations and domestic migrant entrepreneurs. And in Kertao, I found that in the 80s and 90s, just like Biao studies in Zhejiang in Beijing, the logistics stations were mostly run by migrant entrepreneurs coming from a particular place in Zhejiang province. So it was becoming like an ethnic niche economy that a particular group of people have a strong monopoly on the logistics services in the local marketplace. And that was in the 1990s. And in the 2000s, those people no longer were the owners of this logistics service, mostly because the state has taken hold. While at the same time, those figures become some of the most prominent local business leaders. They become leaders of the business associations. They become appointed as a manager of certain market places in the gigantic marketplace buildings, etc. And those people obviously remain extremely powerful, and mostly because they were very powerful and they take a stronghold of logistics services in the 1990s or also in the 1980s. And when I talked to my informant, who were smaller traders, not as prominent as those successful business persons, they always complain that if you don't have good relationship with those people, you won't be able to secure good logistics services. Or it won't be so easy for you to do the business in the local market because you need a lot of different kinds of social network that will help you to connect with those influential people in the local market community. So I guess the distributions of power on this level is quite uneven. So there will be winner and loser in this dynamism of the local economy. And how can we categorize all these small traders as one group of small? I think it's a question that maybe we can explore more ethnographically. And the final point is what I call the machine of global capitalism. And as Biao has argued, the logistic power is undoubtedly empowering the governing capacity of the local Yiwu government. And even though at the same time it is empowering the smaller traders in terms of what they could do in terms what they could do with their religious identity or maybe the other kinds of social activities. But I think we would also like to know to what extent the local government and the local economy can resist the hegemony of the global capitalism, which continues to bring a lot of disruptions and uncertainties to not only Yiwu, but also other very small-scale, localized economic productions and trading markets, not only in China, but also in the global south. And I think one of the recent example that we can talk about is when you look into the recent situation in Yiwu, as we have learned from the news, or maybe if you have heard it from other sources, there is a surge of shipment price. So suddenly it becomes very expensive to ship things from China to the world. And it has made a hard time to many small traders in Yiwu who do export. And why the shipment price becomes so expensive at this particular moment was mostly because when you look to the case of India, for example, there has been suspensions of productions. So a lot of production orders has been moved from India and other parts of the world who has been badly hit by COVID-19 to China. So there is a certain increase of production demand and export demand. But while at the same time, the numbers of containers and how fast you can schedule your shipment is quite limited because of the sudden surge of demand, and it has led to a quite outrageous increase of the shipment price, shipment fees, because the logistic company has more say on how much they would charge the exporters in EU, for example. So it seems like the local economy is still quite vulnerable to all these external global economic changes that the local traders, the local government, and the local producer has couldn't do much to resist or go against such hegemonic order. And so I think maybe the questions that I would ask is, and maybe it will also help us to discuss more, is to what extent to the logistic power can empower the local government and the local economy. Because maybe at the end of the day, even though you see a lot of orders coming in from the world to EU, but what they actually could earn in terms of profit making, maybe not much, mostly because they still couldn't control the material price changes. They still couldn't control, for example, maybe there is a certain lockdown in UK or in US that they stop buying from China because of trade war or things like that. So in that sense, I think to what extent can we conceptualize the capacity of the local state when they're trying to develop the logistic power? I think that may be something that would be very interesting to discuss more. And I think I will stop here. So again, thank you very much for giving me this chance to discuss this fascinating paper written by Biao.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kin. I suggest that Biao answers directly, and afterwards we will go through a round of Q&A from the audience.
No, thank you so much, King. I mean, we should talk in another occasion. It's probably just two quick responses. Number one is that regarding the relation between the local economy and the global market, EU so far appear to be surprisingly resilient. And one of the reasons that why it is so resilient, because it went through 1997 Asian financial crisis, 2008 global financial crisis, and then 2018 onwards, US-China trade war, and then 2020 COVID. I mean, this is just the major ones. There's many smaller ones. And one of the reasons is that because each traders and the producers are quite small. And it's true that, I mean, they're small, so they are very flexible. And if they lose, they don't lose too much. I mean, they can survive. And also it's true, some people do quit, but the channeling mechanism is such that they can absorb newcomers, individual newcomers quite quickly. So therefore, the market is always quite full, at least since as far as I know up to now. So that is itself is interesting. I mean, this is why I became quite interested in EU, because I wasn't. I mean, I do have the kind of policy concerns as well. What can the third world do to join the global market? I mean, somehow EU does show that you can. People can join without much capital and without much technological know-how. So I want to find out. So then at least write something that useful for people who are interested, not academically, but practically. So that is a great question. I mean, the resilience is needed to be discussed. related to that, about the logistical power, I'm thinking actually I was thinking along a little different line. So assuming EU market collapsed one day, but the logistical power probably will possibly may remain with the government. But this is as a type of political power, as any other political power has always developed in this way. You develop from a very specific context of transaction or certain event, and then this power become normalized, become a regular feature. So which redefines the relation between the citizenry and the local government. Right? So I mean, I'm thinking logistical power is really parallel to infrastructural power. Infrastructural power now is really become a normal part of the state making, and regardless, your physical infrastructure is very poorly maintained, but even in the Midwest US, the government infrastructure power is still very strong because your security number and your tax and the pension and all that, the state knows everything. So I think the point that you mentioned about this logistic business is really fascinating, really fascinating. And what I observed is that they went through 3 stages in terms of logistic business. Number one, in the very beginning, because they had a market, a small market, it had nothing to do with the global market in the 1980s. I suppose Kejiao is the same. It's a very local market. But nevertheless, they need transport, they need the logistics. And in the beginning, it was primarily were run by kind of the tough muscles, a kind of the quasi-criminal and people who are very tough, who are ready to fight, because you transport the things a long way. It is not an easy job. And then it became, second stage, it became regulated by the government. And now third stage, of course, the government play a very active role. In EU, became very high tech now logistics, because they have centralized the warehouse. And the warehouse became a quite important step in logistics, as well as a handle of governing the entire trade system. But anyway, we can discuss more. But I mean, thank you so much for reminding us that the logistic business is in my view, such a neglected field in mobility studies. I mean, this is so important. So I'm just thinking, in the entire European colonial history, somehow we don't call it a logistic business. It's mainly, we think of transport. But in the beginning, all this navigation and the ship and this exploration was the origin of the financialization and the stock market, and it's where big capital and the state power come together, because they have to raise funds to explore the world. But there is a big difference between logistics today and the transport yesterday, because the logistics today is really to make this management of mobility as a specialist field. So they want to rationalize mobility in a way that is most efficient and the least as frictionless as possible, right? So it itself is become a science, logistics. So I mean, logistic power also has this meaning. So the government does not really intervene how you do business, but they take the way how they regulate the mobility itself as a site, as a subject of regulation, as well as a source from where they will acquire new power. So finally, I mean, just a quick point, as I mentioned, we will have an inventory on mobilities and the social economic changes in Max Planck Institute. And this inventory have a few themes. One of the themes is mobility business mobility business, including this platform technology, platform technology companies like DoorDash and the Chinese Meituan, and this food delivery, and then the logistics is also very important. Mobility business, they turn mobility into commodity, either mobility of things or mobility of people. I think it's understudied. And the reason I mentioned that is that King, I will be so pleased if you can consider, contributing a short entry. I will send you the format. I mean, just about anything, 500 words to 2,000. It's to the inventory. And also, this is an invitation to all of you here. To really will be so pleased if you can support us by contributing inventories or just spreading words, or simply come to visit to have a look, because we want to accumulate all this information in order to share. So we'll be so happy if someone found that useful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Biao, for these for your presentation and for your reactions to the questions and comments raised by Kakinchuk. And thank you also to you, Kakinchuk, for these insightful comments. Now I will open the floor to questions, comments from the audience here on WebEx, but also on YouTube. I know that Gianni D'Amato has raised his hand, so I will just let him ask his question.
Thank you, Robin, and a special thank to Biao and to Ken for their incredibly illustrative picture they gave about a development situation in China. Basically, it has been a sort of crash course into Chinese economic transformation of the recent past. And I read it also as an invitation to go to China once in order to see all of this, in order to have also a first sight view on what is changing. I mean, and if we think about the transformation, the socio-economic and social and political transformation of China of the last 45 years, the huge steps this country had to do, whereas others had 100, 150 years in order to accomplish basically the development. It is an impressive history, which we have observed here. But in listening to you, I was asking myself to which extent this is really only China. If we are looking at state interventions when it came to development issues after World War II, basically this has been the Asian model of the Asian tigers everywhere in the Asian space. Taiwan and Korea, South Korea in particular, but also other countries like Indonesia and the Philippines had a strong impetus from the state in order to organize markets, in order also to organize production sites, because they were basically, to a great extent, also in Japan, state-led after World War II. So here, the role of the state as an intervening variable is not such a surprise. And if I read Charles Sable's and Michael Pure's book on the second industrial divide correctly, there have been also signs in Western Europe in which the states took a coordinating role in order to intervene and to reinforce basically the industrial development after World War II. But my question is the following one. Why is this from below? I don't buy that one. I mean, I don't buy also your explanation. Basically, this is a state role which is from above. Basically, it follows state interests, state capitalist interests, state development interests, in which basically the agents you have studied in the past don't play such a role. They are using these channels. They are using these markets in order to to have basically intersection, basically a place where they can have the necessary exchanges like on a fair. But this is basically coordinated by the state. And I'm really asking myself, why is this from below? I couldn't buy this one. And the other role is obviously, since this is a market which is strongly organized also by local governments and by the central government to a certain extent, how is it linked to migration laws? Basically, you were mentioning traders to come. I can imagine that not for all people it's so easy to enter these places. So how is this organized? This will be one of my two questions. Thank you. And again, this has been an invitation to go to China.
Yeah. King, probably, King, do you want to answer about the migration regulation first? Because you know that part particularly well.
Maybe I think just briefly, but because I don't know the situation in Yiwu very well. Of course, even though there has been an ongoing immigration reforms in China, that they have recently established a migration bureau to integrate all the foreigner management into one governing business. So it is on the central state level. While at the same time, on local level, different parts of China has different response to this reform from top down. So I think so. I can only answer this question based on what I have read about Yiwu, even though it's not like ethnographic like observations. But it seems like in Yiwu, they have been quite. I would argue that they have been quite welcoming to foreign traders for quite a long time, and mostly because as Biao has argued as well. I think it is a very accurate empirical observations. That is, the state has its capacity, even though it's limited, but it has its capacity to create some sort of foreigners-friendly policies. So, for example, in Yiwu, if you need to renew your visa, you can renew up to 2 years. But if you are in other parts of China, you can only renew up to 1 year, and then you have to go to apply for a new visa or do a lot of paperwork before you get another visa. But in Yiwu, you can get a visa in 2 years. So it is quite a special and unique policy that you can only find in Yiwu, but not in other parts of China. So in this sense, I think maybe it is not necessarily related to Gianni's questions, but I think it is important to mention that Yiwu has been quite special and unique in terms of how it creates its own style of foreigners management, which offer quite a lot of flexibility on the ways in which how foreigners should be managed on the local level.
Yeah, thanks, King. And I think it's absolutely correct. I mean, Yiwu is listed as a special kind of experimental zone in immigration management, but still the rule is very strict. I mean, the foreign traders, most of them are unhappy. They feel it's very inconvenient to get a visa. And also, which year was that? I mean, then the people from Middle East have special difficulties in getting visa, for a while because of so-called concern of terrorism and etc. But in general, China has not opened up at all for foreigners in short term, I mean, let alone long term. So therefore, this actually is important dimension about this channeling effect. So they want to create a very smooth operating marketplace, and the people come short term, make a deal quickly, then you leave. I mean, the government certainly have no interest of seeing long-term settlement. So they want, my reading is that they try to minimize that kind of social impacts, but they want to maximize this quick, efficient deal making. So that's a part of the story. And thank you very much. I think the phrase from below, I completely agree, is not accurate at all. I mean, I originally put there was thinking about the logistical logistification development, because in 1960s in the US is primarily driven by a few large companies and armed with military technology. I mean, China actually was, to a great extent, was driven by e-commerce, because e-commerce is very widespread. So the logistics, because e-commerce people need delivery to their home, their doors. So that create a big impetus. But by and large, if we look at who are the main investors, who are the main regulators, who are the main planners, of course, it's the government. It's not a really grassroots, spontaneous from below. I completely agree. But again, a great question about what is the specificity of the role of Chinese state in this story as compared to other developmental state in Asia and even to some extent in Latin America. That part, I think the EU case has a little special because, I mean, basically Chinese government have done everything other government has done. Whatever Japanese government has done, I think the Chinese government has also tried in terms of promoting economic development and trade. But so far, the historical experience is primarily, I would call the chain logic. They want to have organized certain hierarchy, so bring in small players under the big players. I mean, this is probably very typical. Japan, the earliest developmental model, and Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, all quite similar. So the network was never too important. But now the EU is this kind of a channel, which in a way, economically speaking, is more liberal than the chain model, earlier one, like less intervention in terms of the economic transactions. But actually, there's a more kind of conditioning capacity from the state, right, by creating certain physical infrastructure, etc. But that is, I think, is important to clarify. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your reactions to this question. Is there someone else who wants to ask a question or make a comment to the presentation by Biao? I don't see any hand risen, but if that's not the case, I will just use my privilege of the organizer to ask you one question, one from total ignorance about the situation in China, but how you already mentioned this, but very briefly, to your knowledge, how was these kind of markets affected by the COVID crisis? I mean, of course, with the whole mobility restrictions that the government put in place, and also the quarantine, or I don't know exactly how did it happen concretely, practically, and how was it? You mentioned that this market was resilient to these crises, but to what extent was it affected, and to the best of your knowledge?
Yeah. Probably I say a couple words, and then King also can tell us more. And I don't have data, but it's somehow performed better than I thought. And one new trend is the turn to internal trade, more e-commerce and S-commerce. So-called S-commerce is social media commerce. So it is a kind of very widespread, and it's a kind of grassroots. So that is, of course, the volume is limited compared to export, but nevertheless, is help some companies to survive. And number two is that at least a certain sector, there's a larger demand. Furniture, anything to do with indoor decoration, and there's has a large demand because we know the total retail trade worldwide probably increased during the COVID, and so that part probably is not too bad. And then actually the impact of trade war between US and China did not impact EU as much as we assume, partly because they are very cheap goods. So therefore, the tariff, increase by 30%, 50%, but that still does not translate too much into the absolute dollar numbers. And then I ask, how do you deal with that? They say, basically, we split. The American side also, they reduce, and they will give us a little more. And we also, we share what the government charged as a tariff. So that is a second point. Third point is I was amazed about, of course, how efficient and strict they regulate the marketplace. And I hope you're not fed up with me making another advertisement about the inventory. One of the themes of our inventory is securitizing mobility. So that is what the EU government has been doing. They don't want to stop mobility, but they want to securitize. You can move, but you have to move in a particular way. You have to declare you are going to move. You have to report your health, your temperature through your mobile phone. You have to register, and then you have to, once you come home, you have to complete the registration system and etc. Use a special bus, etc. So they really securitize mobility, and the government actually organizes special buses, etc., to bring workers to EU, to the factories to produce goods. Of course, that is not unique, but in Germany and in the UK, also they chartered a flight, right, to bring workers from Romania as agricultural workers. So that is another example of securitizing mobility. So that is what happened during COVID. Yeah. King, what's your observation about Keqiao or you?
Maybe thank you, Biao, and maybe I just want to add one observation here. Of course, just like virtual observation, because of COVID, we couldn't be there to do ethnographic observations in Yiwu or other parts of Zhejiang province. But what I've learned from my Indians or Pakistani or Afghans interlocutors, many of them used to do a lot of business with Yiwu and other parts of Zhejiang, but now they could no longer come to China because it's kind of difficult for them to get the visa. And many of them, as far as I know, are now staying in Dubai while they are trying to get another Chinese visa to come back to China. Why they go to Dubai? Well, Dubai is like a re-export center of many goods coming from Yiwu. So when you look into the China to Middle East trade through the Yiwu network, it is quite a large number of goods exporting from China to Dubai, for example, along this line. And so many traders from South Asia, from the Middle East, are specializing in the trade between these two places, Yiwu and Dubai. So they cannot come to China, so they stay in Dubai because they can still sort of procure the goods exported from China by their friends or by their business partner. So at the same time, even though they are now facing difficulties to come to China, but they still want to continue their business by staying in a place that is strongly connected with Yiwu. So it could be Dubai, it could be Mumbai, it could be Delhi, it could be Jakarta, for example. So at the same time, even though you see less mobility in terms of people, in terms of population movement, in terms of people's movement, but why at the same time, why Yiwu is so important? Because it has mediated a global order of mobility. So it's not necessary for them to come to Yiwu while they are doing business with the people in Yiwu. So that is something that I think is quite an interesting observation that I can offer here. Thank you.
I really want to learn more about that. Yeah, so this global connections actually. Another important reason for EU's development in business was because of the misfortune of the world, especially the Middle East. And one of the major clients of EU market has been UNHCR and the various humanitarian programs who need goods, daily livelihood goods, daily life goods for refugees and etc. So that is, you know, it's a. I mean, I don't know how to summarize that, but it's an important question. So EU is regarded as a very stable trade hub and anchor in the world that is very unstable, especially in Middle East and some part of Africa. So that gives it a special position. And of course, that's related to the state power, but it is also related to certain global geopolitical reconfiguration as well. But I mean, yeah, if you have any suggestions on how to capture that, it's very helpful. Yeah, I see a question in the chat room.
Yes, please try to answer.
Okay, great. It is yeah, from Di Paula. Thank you very much. So relation between the central and the local government, it is a very important question. By and large, the EU's development primarily, historically speaking, has been a local initiative. That is not too special in China. It is a bit of like that. In a way, it's kind of federal system. If we take the US as a reference point, so every place actually are actively encouraged to explore different ways of development as after end of 1970s, because as a way to speed up economic development. So they want different localities try different ways to see which one the best. So it has been a local initiative, but then of course now they reach to a stage that because it become global. And once it becomes global, it's no longer a county government's business. So you have to go through the central government, especially the model I mentioned, this marketplace procure model, which allow international trade to take place as if it is internal trade. I mean, that means they have to ban more than 10 regulations, currency regulations, license regulations, and sanitary expectation regulation, all that. I mean, that has to become from the center. So actually, the local government said that they worked more than 1 year lobbying the central government in order to get this permission. So that I thought is interesting because as a visitor, you go to the market, you saw it's a completely laissez-faire. It's just very open. But this openness, this laissez-faire, is extremely carefully constructed, and it's within the boundary. And then, of course, it means the government can take away this permission anytime if things go wrong. And I suppose all the traders know that as well. Yeah. So this is another example why logistical power must be predicated on very strong political power. Yeah. So local government leeway is still relatively wide in terms of economic model and how to regulate the trade, etc. But now I think in terms of the immigration regulation, and then if any major reform, it has to you need central government permission. Yeah, it does become a little too big. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I posted the question in the chat because I thought it was easier, but I think that is really a super fascinating dynamic that you described there between local and national, and the kind of leeway that then becomes even a method of control in a way. I think super fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, Gianni, how did the EU succeed in marketing?
Basically, I mean, it's I'm looking on the map where UE is, and it's I don't know, it's not it's not at the coast. It's in the middle of China. So how has it been able to market its existence and its capacities of a marketplace on other continents? How did it work?
In the beginning, it through Canton Fair. A Canton Fair is a huge, of course, a state fair in Guangzhou, and that probably will never stop, even during the Cultural Revolution. It's a continue. I mean, it's known worldwide, and then it's really word of mouth. And I read some ethnography writing, and some people, from Latin America, it's interesting. They can't speak Chinese, can't speak English. They can only speak Spanish. They just came all the way to Yiwu because they heard the goods are, Yiwu is a center that you can buy directly at the cheapest price. So it's not, I think, Yiwu is, the government did lots of, if you go to the airport in Berlin, you will see huge advertisement in the Berlin airport about Yiwu. So definitely the government is doing some work. But I think a very important part is really what I mentioned, these small traders in global south. There is kind of third world consumerism, low-end consumerism, really push these traders to look for places where they can source goods at a low price, wide range diversities, and then with a minimum paperwork, etc. EU actually meet their needs. Yeah, but it's important that probably we need to do comparative studies on why other wholesale markets in other parts of the world. In Nairobi and in as King mentioned, in India, traditionally they're huge. In Egypt. Whether or not there's something they can learn from you, and so that could be meaningful. Yeah. Robin?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking if there are other questions, but it seems not to be the case. And I think we already took much of your time. So now it's time to close the session and to say thank you very much and to applaud also, because it was a very interesting talk, and personally I learned a lot.
Thank you.
I thank also Karakin Chuk for his insightful comments, and I look forward to carry on these fruitful exchanges with you, and I will see you tomorrow at the workshop. But also, I hope we can also continue these exchanges. So thank you very much.
Okay, we still have time tomorrow. Okay, yes. Have a nice meal. Have a nice evening. Yes. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you to you all. Thank you very much.